Well, welcome to the second and final panel of today. We've got some fairly high bars to clear from previous discussions, so let's nail it. I'm Anna Leach, I'm the Chief Economist at the Institute of Directors. I also sit on the Women in Economics Network Steering Group, so I have the pleasure of working with Misa, Amadina formerly, and other far too esteemed colleagues. Yes, I have lots of lots of imposter syndrome to manage myself. Joining me on the panel today, we've got Nat Benjamin, who is Executive Director for Financial Stability and Risk from here at the Bank of England. We've got Lucas Balafoutas, Professor of Economics and Head of the Economics Department at Exeter. We have got Dawn Holland, who is the Director of Economic Research at Moody's. And we have Lizzie Burden, who is Daybreak Europe anchor at Bloomberg TV, and with whom I've had many innovating discussions about politics and policy in the past. So our theme for our panel is collaboration and coalition building. So I'm going to invite each of our panellists to just give a quick introduction and give a bit of detail on sort of where they're coming from in talking to this theme before we go into the discussion and then open for Q&A. I believe the online participants can ask questions in the chat box throughout. Misa, we should collect those. It might give us some interesting ideas for the ones that we don't answer, for future sessions that we run. So, Nat, if I can turn to you to kick us off.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So I lead the financial stability area of the Bank of England. I'm on our financial policy committee. And in the past, I've sort of had different role within the Bank of England and the authorities, interacting a lot with the rest of the financial sector, the private sector, both in normal times and in times of crisis. So that has shaped my perspective on a number of the things we are about to discuss, and the massive difference it makes to have diverse and cohesive groups of individuals who respect each other when important decisions have to be made. So that's my perspective. I'll talk more about it later. I'm also a co-sponsor, executive co-sponsor of the Bank of England's Women Network, and together with my colleague and friend Charlotte Gerken. So it's also in that capacity that I'm here. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing about these things internally within the bank.
Thank you. Professor.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see you all. Fun fact, my full title is Professor of Economics, Diversity and Inclusion. So that says something about the kind of research I do, and I've been doing that for many years. I work on topics such as gender differences on labor markets, gender differences in behavior, affirmative action, and other ways to support diversity. Also, more recently, what AI means for labor markets. So that's one bit why this is interesting for me. And with my head of department hat on, obviously that gives me more opportunities to deliver some sort of impact in this space and to put the things that I research into practice. We are, with my team at Exeter, we are very much committed to diversity, promoting people of different backgrounds, and that does not refer just to gender. We have several initiatives in place, in-house, but also externally facing. We're engaged with the UK Women in Economics Network in several ways, and that's a privilege. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm Dawn Holland, so currently Director of Economic Research at Moody's, but my career has sort of moved from different types of workplace environments. I started in a very small academic research institute where I was for a very long time, and then went to a very large international organization where I worked for some time, and now I'm working in the private sector. So I've sort of seen the differences and similarities across the different types of workplace environments. So Diane showed this interesting chart that had, the women in economics and gender economics at the top here, and the sort of more techie side there. I'm more on that side, interestingly, but I guess, but I've been trying to sort of champion my younger, more junior female economists, and particularly encouraging them to think about gender issues and macroeconomics, and helping them to promote their research in that area.
Hi everyone, I'm Lizzie Burden. Thanks for having me today. I am anchor of Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg TV. You have to be an early bird to watch it. It's at 6 a.m, but there are lots of women in this audience who've been guests on the show. This morning we had Karen Ward. I think she's a member of the network. Victoria, you've been on recently as well. Previously, I wrote about the UK economy for Bloomberg News, and before that for The Telegraph. Proud that in fact, my best read story ever was about menopause in the workplace, and it got millions of views, which is quite a feat, I think, on the terminal. But that was back in 2021 when it was taboo, so I hope that made a bit of a difference, and now it's really part of the conversation. Before that, just to shout out a couple of the schemes that helped me get into my position. I was on the board of Creative Access, which got me my first internship in journalism at the Times and led to the graduate scheme. I mentor alumni of Creative Access's scheme, but also alumni of the Journalism Diversity Fund. That paid for my diploma in journalism, and so I wouldn't be here without these amazing schemes, and it's nice to pay it back in.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think nice panel of perfectly pitched diversity for this discussion. So first theme of which is leading through action. So Dawn, I'll start with you first, if I may. So nice direct questions for you here. So what sexism have you experienced or otherwise witnessed in your professional life? How have you responded to it? And what difference did your actions make?
So yes, thanks for a very direct question. So overt sexism, I think, is not as much of an issue as the sort of undercurrents and what I would call them challenges. So if I could highlight two challenges that I've come across in my career as a woman. And the first is, and I'm sure many people in this room have also been in the same position, is I can't tell you, certainly in my early career, the number of times when I was the only woman in the room, the only woman sitting around the table. That's uncomfortable. And I want to applaud the men who have shown up today. Thank you. This is really important. So it's uncomfortable, sure, but it also puts this huge sort of burden of responsibility on your shoulders. You feel, or I felt, I wouldn't want to put words in anyone else's mouth, but I felt this sort of responsibility to prove that and we talked about this in the previous panel, that I deserved to be there, I was meant to be there, and so just having to sort of overcompensate, and I think by demonstrating that I was, it was valid for me to be there, and also feeling that I had to speak for all of the other women who weren't there. So big responsibility there. And the second point I would make is, and I'm going to flag this as the sort of biggest career mistake I've made in my path, which is when I was trying to balance the challenges of having a young family and a career at the same time. And like I think many women, I felt like a complete failure because I was not giving enough to my family as much as I wanted to, and I was not giving enough to my job. I cut down to working part-time. So I was working 4 days a week after my second child and 3 days a week after my third child for a little while. but my workload did not change. So effectively, I was, and I thought I was so lucky because this was back before working from home was a thing. I thought I was so lucky because I only had to be in the office 9 to 5, 3 days a week, and I could leave at 5 o'clock on the dot. And then I would get home and I would work until like midnight, you know, after my kids went to bed. And so it basically was doing a full-time job, but I was getting paid for 3 days a week, and I was contributing 3/5 to my pension, which, you know, that has permanent long-term implications. So just a cautionary note. Try not to make that same mistake.
Very fair. Resonates hugely, but I won't go into that. Can you talk to us about now what you've been doing in your role, which seems very pertinent, to support women, but of course diverse talent more broadly here at the bank?
Sure, thank you very much. And if that's okay, before getting into what we've done, I'll say a little bit about why we've done it. And that's because at the end of the day, everything we do as a central bank boils down to ensuring trust in the currency, in UK money. That's why we exist. Trust that money does its job of being storage of value, a means of exchange, and a unit of account. That's why we exist. So it's all about trust. And one way or another. And trust that the financial system will function in good times and in bad times. And that decisions our decisions are well judged, well informed, independent, and made in the public interest. And that's where being inclusive and diverse comes in, because we can't serve as a central bank, we can't serve the people of the UK properly if our workforce isn't representative of the public that we serve. So that's our mindset. This is where we come from. So it's not just a moral obligation, it's also central and core to our mission of maintaining monetary and financial stability. So that's how we think about it. And it's the case not just for us as an organization, but also for the private sector and the rest of the economy that we interact with. So, for example, in the real economy, improving productivity is issue number one. That's the one thing that needs to be sorted. But improving productivity, that requires innovation and adoption of new technology. And put simply, if companies are full of people who come from the same background and think the same, then they're not going to be good at doing things differently or in a new way. So that's how it comes in a very live way that matters a lot for the economy as a whole. Also, within the financial sector, in previous life, I have been supervising international banks in the UK, active in the UK, in capital markets. And I've seen firsthand how a lack of diversity can lead to bad decisions, big losses, and failure. So these things have a real sharp edge to them. It's not just the right thing to do, there's a real consequences. So all of that is why we care, and it's a core part of our job, not just something separate that we do in the margins. Now, what have we done about this, especially on the gender front? So the Bank of England has made significant progress on that over the years against our gender targets and in closing the gender pay gap. It's something we focus a lot on, and we publish that openly in our annual reports every year. So I'm the sponsor of the Women Network, and we launched in March last year a gender action plan, which has it's a very comprehensive strategic plan with a lot of different measures that touches a lot of different aspects of getting us to where we need to be as a modern organization. I'll highlight a few of the key challenges we are working on. One is, earlier the panel talked about the pipeline. We still have too few women applying for roles. And women are facing barriers to career progression, and in comparison to men, women tend to have a relatively poorer day-to-day lived experience. So those are part of the things we're watching very, very carefully. Now, one of the most important areas, if I step through these things quickly, where we've focused on is improving female representation in the pipeline of talent. Now, at the top of the bank, as you probably saw earlier, things are much better than before. So 50% of our executive directors are women, 50% of our governors are women, and 50% of our MPC members are women. So this is a much better situation than we had before, and we do have to recognize that. It's taken a long time, which is what it is. The problem we have is that the pipeline for the future isn't where it needs to be, so it's a big focus on us. And the key issue, and I think this was mentioned earlier, is whether credible women candidates put themselves forward where opportunities arise. And sometimes they don't when it's unclear how flexible, to your point, Dawn, the work will be, the working pattern will be, or being treated differently because of different needs, because of having to work part-time. And 2/3 in the bank of part-time workers are women. I also separately, I'm the executive sponsor of our carers network, so the network of employees who are caring for other people in their personal lives. And there's a big intersectionality here in terms of caring responsibility. The outside majority of carers are women. So it's important to look at these things in the rounds. So that means that actively encouraging talented women to apply for roles, being explicit about flexibility by making it clear to line managers, to hiring managers, that it's their job. It's their job. It's not a favor they need to do. It's their job to use the tools we have to support women for flexible or part-time working arrangements and for those returning from parental leave. We also focus on ensuring our recruitment processes is not as daunting as they have been perceived historically by women. So we do things like, for example, sharing interview questions in advance. Women who, on average, we've talked about it before, tend to put themselves forward less. They can be a bit more comfortable engaging with the conversation, having a genuine conversation when interview time happens. So that's one of the things we're doing. And with the point about making it clear to hiring managers that it's their job to look proactively for credible candidates to put in the pipeline, so that when opportunities arise, they actually dare to put their name forward. That's a very important thing. Another important part of our gender action is the focus on women's lived experiences on a day-to-day basis. In the past, I've seen that in some industry, in the financial sector, it's pretty obvious that there's often either a mansplaining or even sometimes a bit of a laddish culture in some sectors, in some corners, whereby, if a woman makes a point, the reaction is like, And if a man makes exactly the same point, like, this is such a good point. And I think also in the economics academic environment, when you see some conferences and some reaction to papers that are being presented by economists, women versus men, you see some of that happening too. And so within the bank, we make sure that everyone's voice is equally respected, man or woman. That's a great focus of ours. And sometimes it does help to have men allies in the room who say, she's got a point. So that's the type of thing we think about. It also means ensuring that credit is properly attributed to people and to women. So we have championed a policy which we call the author in the room policy. So if someone, man or woman, has been doing a piece of work, we ensure that at least one author of that piece of work is in whichever room in which that work is being discussed, irrespective of how senior that room is. That's quite important to give back credit where it's needed. And also we focus on creating safe spaces to discuss women's health issues such as menopause, for example, which affect well-being. So all these things matter because ultimately they determine whether talented people stay and thrive. So that's what we're doing. We made some progress, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Thanks, Nat. That's quite impressive. That's really fantastic to hear about all that good work the bank is doing. It's a pretty great sales pitch for working at the bank as a woman. I guess we shouldn't be surprised that the bank has a great target and reaction function for dealing with gender and economics. It seems very true to how the bank operates generally, but it's very good to see it being applied in this area.
We take it
as
seriously.
well.
We take it
So
seriously.
yeah, and actually to hear about how you see it as being so core to what you're actually trying to achieve, the trust of the nation. So thank you so much for that. Don't you wish you worked here?
Well, I am actually, yeah.
Coming back to, I mean, that's been just very interesting, I think, to hear about what the bank have been putting in place. You've kind of, I mean, your lived experience very much resonates for me as well in some parts, that whole working part-time, feeling like you have to work full-time, perhaps feeling that if you tried to challenge it, you would get perhaps not a very accommodating, perhaps patronising response, and perhaps not even being able to be willing to try to have the conversation. But from your, I mean, looking back, thinking about where you are now, what kind of support, how did you sort of move on from that place? What support did you seek from others? Did you have support from others? Would you have liked to have seen from others?
Yeah, so I think a lot of issues have already been raised. I was fortunate to have a sort of mentor who, a male mentor who supported my career progression. There weren't really any female role models in my sort of narrow circle at the time. So that is something that I think more young women now might be able to benefit from. So having a mentor, having the allies, I think, around the table are also useful, and they can be men or women saying, let's find out what so and so wants to say about that. That's really important. But I think, and this is particularly an issue. It's so interesting to hear about the Gender Action Plan, and this is very comprehensive. But coming from the private sector, I think things are quite different, and the things have been shifting in an unhelpful way over the past year. If I can just elaborate on what I mean by that, which is that the terms diversity and gender equality have become sort of, I don't know what's the polite way to say it, but sort of no-go areas since the US has rebranded them as discriminatory. And legal departments in the private sector are scouring through all of the mission statements and official sort of policies to basically whitewash out references to that specific language. You're still allowed to talk about inclusion, so that's how things are being reframed. But I think it takes really strong backbone at the very, very top sort of CEO level in order to maintain that when the political environment is turning in a slightly different way.
Yes, a bit of a sobering reminder of where these things stand. We actually surveyed our membership on this last year, and I think when you look outside of perhaps some of the pressures the big global corporations are under, the more domestic, locally focused, and I guess you could say of the corporate sphere feels a bit less pressure and is quite resistant to deprioritising DEI. So we had 3/4 saying they were making no changes. So it's not all lost, but yes, it is a bit of a challenging time for sure. Thank you. Lizzie, what have you seen from your interesting perspective and I guess progress in the progression has been effective in supporting sort of women and diversity more generally?
Well, for all the political environment, we're pressing ahead, right, on pushing women both internally and externally. On the shows, we want to have representation of women in terms of the guests. And I mentioned some of the big names who've been on Bloomberg TV recently and are regulars on, like Victoria, like Diane. But we've also got this pipeline of new voices, that's the name of the programme, and we have 4 hours of sponsored media training for executives to combat that issue that lots of people have talked about, the confidence in public speaking. It's even harder, I think, sometimes when you're on the telly and you don't know who's watching you. I still find it. And as a result of that, since it started in 2018, there have been 4,000 more appearances on TV and radio, 4 times as many more female experts on Bloomberg TV. And last year we had 40%, more than 40% female guests. So we're not there yet, but it's getting better. And that's to push for representation on screen, but then behind the scenes, there's also stuff that we do. One thing that I want to shout from the rooftops that Bloomberg does, because I think it's amazing, is they pay 20 grand towards IVF in the UK. Isn't that incredible? So just in terms of that parenthood piece that you were talking about, Dawn, I think that's Bloomberg really putting their money where their mouth is. The other thing is we have this event called Women Money Power. Catherine Mann's sitting there, and she was one of our speakers at that event last year. It's the second year running. Yes, last year was the second year. And what I think is cool about Women Money Power is we don't talk about sexism and stuff. Obviously there's a great place to have conversations like that. This is an amazing forum to be doing that. But what we do at Women Money Power is we have female interviewers and female guests and panels, and we talk about money and power. And so, for example, I interviewed Julia Hoggett, the LSE CEO, about how we get more people into investing in the UK. She said the LSE is not for sale. And so that was a great conversation. I'm glad we got the chance. The other thing that I want to highlight is Bloomberg's journalism programmes, because I've mentioned how I came through a diversity programme. We have them in, I think it's in London, Brazil and New York. And it's a week's training, because I feel like most people don't really know about financial journalism or economics journalism. I certainly didn't when I was coming into it. But they pay for your board, your food and your travel. And that would have made a huge difference to me when I first came down to London. So it's just, again, an example of Bloomberg putting their money where their mouth is. And I think that is the thing that we really need to do to get real diversity.
Yeah, here. So, Professor Lucas. Clearly, I mean, we had some really great examples of coalition building and just the broader environment, changes in the broader environment for support for different branches of diversity. Of course, here we're particularly interested in gender, but it's got, like, the approach has got corollaries across the diverse groups. But what can we do to sort of persuade people to keep supporting, to begin supporting diversity and, of course, gender in particular?
Before I come to coalitions, can I just quickly pick up on something Nat said before about interruptions in seminars? So in case, we have female academics in the room, and sometimes you go and give a seminar somewhere and you have the impression that maybe there are too many questions, maybe some of them wouldn't have been asked if you had a different gender. There's a very recent paper that came out, I think, in the American Economic Review, that shows exactly that there's causal evidence that women get interrupted more, and they get interrupted more, and the kind of questions they get tend to be more, let's say, have a more negative tone. So it's not just in your mind. It's happening. Yeah. Now on coalition building, this is important, right? Because I think it has to do a lot with getting also the overrepresented group on board. In that case, that refers to men, but depending on the characteristic we're looking at, it could be a different group. One part of this is if you believe in something and you want to be an advocate, you need to step up and talk about it. So be open, be loud, say what you stand for, right? And And so part of it is just making the argument. And the argument is, in my opinion, a straightforward one to make. The way I present it is, first of all, diversity is something that for me and for our leadership team is the right thing to do. So it's a matter of principle. It's, you know, an end in itself. But beyond that, it's a means to an end. It's something that's good for the organization. We heard Diane talk about monocultures, not being very productive. You, Nat, talked about productivity being higher when you have more diverse environments. And that's true. Again, going back to research, we have enough evidence that diverse teams are more productive, right? So it's not a zero-sum game. Everybody wins, or at least on aggregate, we all win if we have more diverse teams. And these arguments need to be made, right? People need to hear that. Now, beyond that, there's a piece around creating the formal structures, and that could be, you know, related to, at Exeter we have the Wellbeing, Inclusion and Culture Committee, we have an EDI director who's sitting over there, and we have all these initiatives in place to actually get people on board, and that relates not just to the outcomes you achieve, but also to the signaling value that these things have, right? They increase the visibility and the perceived legitimacy of these initiatives. They make it clear that this is what we believe is the right thing to do. Now, I thought it was quite interesting what Dawn said, right? And we don't have that so much in European universities yet, but as the political environment is starting to shift a little bit, and you have this, you know, culture wars back in a way, right? Key question is, how do you build resilient institutions and self-enforcing institutions and mechanisms that bring us back where we want to be when there's pushback, right? And that's a tricky one. And I think especially for that, a key thing are not just the formal structures, but also the informal structures, social norms, right? Norms are key. And again, from research, we know that norms are one of the strongest influences on how people behave in, you know, across the board of behaviors. So you can disband an EDI committee if that's what you want to do as a, you know, policymaker. But norms are harder and slower to move. So you need to work on both, right? Have your formal structures in place, try to create the right norms. And that's where those of us in a position of responsibility or leadership have a very important role to play, because we are creators of social norms. Everybody, all of us, right? But especially people who have some sort of leadership position can be very pivotal in that.
All right, I'm conscious of time, so I think it makes sense to open to questions at this point. I suggest we take a couple of questions at a time from the room, and do please introduce yourselves when you ask a question. Yes. So there's one there, I think there was a hand here.
It's interesting that you say introduce yourself, because nobody has voluntarily introduced themselves so far, which I actually, like, again, talking about imposter syndrome, I always hate saying my own name and who I am. Freya Beamish, Chief Economist, TS Lombard. There we go, I did it. There's been a lot of discussion about the sort of psychology. There's been a lot of discussion, almost like from a micro perspective, from each individual institution trying to sort of, you know, create the best institutional environment so that women can kind of flourish. There's been sort of a couple of times when the macroeconomy and the sort of feedback effects from the macroeconomic environment to the hiring of women have sort of nearly come into the conversation. Diane mentioned about sort of, is it correlation or causation with regards to productivity growth, and the moment when that sort of percentage started to flatline in the very interesting chart that she showed. Before COVID, in a lot of the research coming out of the Federal Reserve at the moment when there was the move towards average inflation targeting was suggesting that minorities, and I'm not sure if this also applied to women as well, but the end of the cycle is when a lot of minorities start to get pulled into the labour market. So there's a cyclical phenomenon there. And there's also probably a very long-term structural phenomenon there. I've forgotten the name of the woman that was presenting at the Bloomberg Money, Women and Power event, but she wrote a book called Economica, showing that there are these very long super cycles in when the economy is doing well, that's when women come into the economy, and when the economy starts to do poorly, that's when women start to get pushed out of the economy again. And again, correlation or causation, we don't know. I'll probably leave it there before I get into trouble about inflation targeting and sort of hot economies versus colder economies, but I thought I'd bring that into it.
Yep. I'm Roberta from Bank of England. So I got one question is like to what extent or how our public and also private sector help women, especially who are deciding to change their field from non-economic background to economic fields, especially for women who are in their 30s, 40s, or even like career returners. Thank you.
So thank you. That was, sorry, just to clarify, so that was about, do you want to change, you want to swing into economics from a non-economics background?
Reverse way.
The other way?
Yeah.
Go leave economics to go elsewhere?
From non-economics to economics field. Thank you.
Right. Who would like to? So I can otherwise. I think that point about when women enter and leave the labour market and the relationship with the economy, that logically firms hire the easiest people. When they run out of the easiest people, they hire the harder people. Unfortunately, women have tended to fall into the hard people. And yes, there is an information sales campaign to explain why they're not hard, they're actually useful, and diversity is good, but still women and others end up being the tail. And we're not in a very positive cyclical position at the moment, shall we say, economically, for a number of reasons, and possibly structurally as well. And that will create some challenges.
I mean, maybe a couple of observations. One, I agree with your observation, and I think that is where intersectionality comes in and how it interacts with economic cycle comes in. And then there's a question for corporates, for employers, okay, what does that mean, therefore, that we need to have in place for employees? But it's a very good observation. In terms of your question, it's interesting because what you say very much echoes. So we go around in the bank, we go around the country, we talk to people, we go to schools and we talk to so young people who are looking into careers. And my last visit, actually, I was in a school and we did a bit of a chat about what the Bank of England does, etc. There was one girl and 10 boys in the room, and then at the end, she waited for us at the end when everyone had left and said, "There's really not a lot of girls." And talking to some colleagues, how do you do to actually get on and do a career for yourself? And I think part of the answer has to be, well, there has to be role models, and young women have to be able to see very successful women in high positions to say, actually, well, yeah, there's a path, it exists. And that's why it's so important to be able to say, to point to senior leaders in a place like the Bank of England or other very large institutions, so actually, yes, you can be that person at some stage. But role models is super important from that perspective.
And I think role models with atypical career pathways, I think, are quite interesting to hear, which is reminding me that I found out yesterday that Anna Valera is a chartered accountant, as well as her various other qualifications, which is like, okay, that blew my mind a little bit. Any more questions? One there.
Oh, hi, my name is Rachel. I'm a student at the University of Manchester. And I wanted to kind of piggyback off the point that Diane made about there being only 1 in 4 women as a part of like an inclusivity scheme, and how this has kind of flatlined over the last few years. But should it be more of a case that there isn't much emphasis into including women, a broader range of women that now fall into the wider umbrella of women. So that is women of color, women of different sexualities. Should there be more emphasis into those spaces? Because I can look into this room and I can feel inspired to want to join these fields, but there might be other people who look at this room and be like, I can't see someone that looks like me in this space. And would there be certain things that are put in place for me to feel accepted into these spaces as a Black woman, as a woman from a different sexuality, those kind of things? Could that be the way forward?
Take one out.
Yeah, hi. My name is Elizabeth Martindale. I'm a senior economist at Oxford Economics. I guess this question thinks about a couple of different things, but thinking about imposter syndrome, obviously women experience it more, and we're now at this age where AI is becoming more important. Computer science skills are becoming more important, and certainly I feel that imposter syndrome of I don't really know how to use these things yet. I know there's lots of other people that feel that, and I just sort of wonder, in your careers, have you had a moment where there was this new phenomenon that people all had to learn at the same time? Some people were kind of slower to catch up, or kind of how do we work together to support people that maybe aren't as keen or initially interested in these things, to learn how to use them and to kind of keep their skills up to date in the labour market? Hopefully that makes sense.
Interesting and hard one. Who would like to?
I'll take this one because I'm the woman of colour on the panel.
That'd be a good one.
I do think that, but that's why I started off by talking about diversity in general and the schemes that I've been part of, Creative Access, the Journalism Diversity Fund, which target diversity and inclusion broadly. But I mentor, as I say, alumni of those schemes, and everything that you're saying is true. For example, one person that I was mentoring had this real problem with a man taking credit for her ideas in meetings, and so we strategized how to get around that. And then another thing that comes up a lot is, how do you get a raise? Well, every single person that I mentor, I'm telling them you should have a boast sheet of everything that you achieved, so that when it gets to the time of the year, you can be fighting to say, I deserve that money. And so it's just passing on that wisdom to create the culture, which is what you're saying goes beyond the institutional changes.
Can I add something to this? Because I think it's very important. As I was saying before, our focus should be not just on, this is a discussion mostly on gender today, but diversity goes beyond gender, as you just said. And this is something that applies equally to men, right? So you have men of color, different sexualities, different religious backgrounds, and very often they are facing the same kind of obstacles that are either structural or maybe have to do with their own perception of things, lack of confidence, and so we need to keep the 360-degree perspective on women, men, all genders and backgrounds. That's a very good point. Thank you.
I think, just to pick up from that, if you are successful in creating an environment, a culture, which is really truly inclusive and where everyone feel that they belong, that they can thrive, it benefits everyone, including men, including white men, and so I guess that's the mindset. If you look at the list of things we are doing for genders or for other characteristics, most of those things would benefit everyone, like literally everyone. But it might just be the case that if you get them right, they have an outsized positive impact on certain characteristics, like gender or like ethnicity. But the mindset is very much that these things benefit everyone, and everyone needs to have that environment, including men and white men, an environment that they can be themselves, they're well respected.
Okay. Are we allowed to overrun a little bit more, Lisa? Take a couple more. Have we got some?
We can obviously, but yeah, get in contact after you get as well.
Yeah, brilliant, thanks. Yep, take a couple more questions.
Hi, Charlotte Dundee at the CBI. I think I was just basically been very lucky throughout my career to have a lot of female role models. From the point I joined actually at the CBI, Anna being one of them, our whole way up has been female. So for me, I think it's never about not seeing myself in that position. I've always been able to see that because I've seen amazing female leaders be able to do that. But since having my son and going on maternity leave, I think it's more for me in the future about being able to go into a role that I can do well at a more senior level. And that's my concern. I think now I've had a lot more imposter syndrome since coming back from maternity leave. I'd just be interested in any insights, particularly you were kind of talking earlier, Dawn, about a similar thing. After having kids, it's doing it well, coming back to your job and being able to do that well. But also, I think the way I'm thinking about it is being able to parent well at the same time. And I didn't want to put myself into a situation where I become more senior and I can't do that. And I'd just be really interested in how you've managed to balance that. And I suppose what organisations are doing, I think there was something you mentioned earlier, Nat, around kind of putting into job descriptions of flexibility, etc. Because even being able to apply, I think, is a concern of mine going forward. So I'd just be interested on kind of returning to work and things.
Can I just, I think that's, and this is an issue that's been come up at several points. I think Victoria mentioned the getting stuck syndrome, which is partly because I certainly found, and I know a lot of people, my cohort found that they were afraid to try and change jobs because they knew what they were doing. They knew they could just about manage that and manage their sort of household responsibilities at the same time. And trying to take on a new challenge was just, maybe it wouldn't work, and it's scary. It is scary. Leap of faith. Leap of faith. I mean, I think people have said it before. This is not the first time it's come up. But trust yourself. You do have the skills needed. You're not an imposter. You have them. You can put them to use in all sorts of different ways. But it is really scary. I stayed in my first job for 18 years because I was so scared to leave. That's not the only reason, but lots of reasons. But having made that jump, I was like, oh wow, that's actually, it's doable and it's achievable. And I kind of wish I'd done it 5 years earlier. But yeah, leap of faith.
If I may add to that, so I think there's a couple of things. One is actually during maternity leave for the employer to actually think about the person and say, there is this opportunity that is coming up. You're on maternity leave, but you'll be returning at something. Are you interested for when you return in that opportunity? So keeping the person in mind for future opportunities, that's something we do quite proactively. And then in terms of shaping the opportunity when the woman returns, that's also quite a focus for us. So we are watching very carefully the extent to which we can promote job shares at more and more senior levels of the organization. So it is the case, as you said, that once there's been a kid, sometimes if the person wants to take more time for a bit with the family, actually a job share works particularly well during that period. So we're trying, and historically it was like, job share, we can't do that at some level. Well, no, actually you can. It can be done. And we've had some very successful examples of job shares at senior level. So that's the type of thing that we are seeking to promote, in addition to, in the absence of job share, just having the, offering the flexibility for work to be done at, a time that works for the person.
Can I give I'm being a bit naughty. I've seized the mic because there's this fantastic book, and I don't know how many people in the room have read it, by a lady, an American academic called Corinne Lowe. It's called Feminomics, and it's really excellent. And I think the interesting thing about that book is sometimes we get a little bit hung up on what success looks like. And actually, there's lots of ways that you can live a successful life, and they don't all have to follow exactly the same model at all of the same time. So I would appeal, especially to younger women in the audience, to have a look at that book and start to think about what it is you actually want, rather than what people may tell you that you want. It's very, very interesting.
Thank you.
I'm conscious of time, and so, Misa, should we wrap up at this point? Though I know there are lots of questions left over. We could say, I mean, I know there were, that's the thing, there's a plethora now and I can't choose. So I suggest everyone who has questions, nab the person you want to question over lunch, or otherwise stalk them on LinkedIn. Because I think this has been a very interesting panel, and it is, I mean, it feels like it barely scratches the surface of what is such an important topic, which is taking these challenges and converting them into solutions that work and can be embedded across the economy in a variety of different types of organisation. And so it's really good to hear what the bank are doing in that space, and you have to go forth and now sell it to everybody else. That's your next duty, I'm afraid. We'll have you as a webinar. So thank you to the panellists. Thank you for everyone for your questions. Sorry we didn't have enough time for everybody's questions, but as I say, do stalk people. Perseverance.
Okay. So I think Misa has asked me to make a few closing remarks before we finish the session and enjoy the networking lunch. So holding everybody up from lunch, if I could just make a few comments, and also, of course, really importantly, to say some thank yous. So firstly, to say thank you to Anna, and huge thanks to all the speakers today, including speakers from our audience who've asked such insightful questions. Thanking them for their insights and for giving their time so generously today. My name is Jo Swaffield. I am a Professor of Economics and Dean of the Social Sciences at the University of Southampton, but my role today is in one that I hold and I feel very privileged to hold, which is Chair of the Royal Economic Society's Women's Committee. So in terms of what we've heard today, what a rich set of comments and presentations we've heard. And I have the really sort of challenging opportunity now to try to summarize it all into a couple of comments. So my apologies for, I'm sure, will not be as rich as it might be if I had weeks to sit and think and ponder upon it in true academic style. So I think a few things that are sort of observed and maybe worth reflecting on is starting with Diane's comments that really about the share of women in economics. And we saw there really clearly a plateau. Okay, it's not getting any better. It's not changing. It's roughly about 30%, which is roughly the number that you get going into undergraduate degrees. And that is roughly the number you get throughout, 30%. And that really important question of what is the right answer? What is the percentage that is correct? And I'm not sure I know what the answer is to that, but what I'm pretty sure about is it's not 30%. I think it should be higher, and I was very encouraged to hear about the percentages we've got in senior roles now at the Bank of England, which sound much more like 50%, which sounds much fairer to me. I can't believe economics is not of interest to the whole population, and I don't see why women would be less interested in it. So thinking maybe more like 50% seems reasonable to me. We've also heard really importantly how people feel stuck. They get into a period of their career where they are stuck. And I think it's really important for organisations to recognise when people feel stuck that the opportunity for contributions start to be reduced. And that sort of untapped productivity, contribution, value, talent is important. And if that's particularly certain types of people who are stuck, then that's problematic for the economy and wider society. I'm really pleased. One of the initiatives I've been leading on with colleagues, Katie Nicoletti from University of York, is a mid-career mentoring scheme within the Royal Economic Society. Now, that is just for academic economists, but in our field, in our discipline, we observe women going into economics. They become lecturers, and then they become senior lecturers or associate professors, but they do not transition in equal proportions to the professorial level. And there is a waste of talent there, people who could be brought forward. So in terms of thinking about issues, I'm concerned about the share. I'm concerned about people being stuck. I'm also concerned that we are still having the same conversations about how we feel we've got imposter syndrome. We are still being sort of apologetic for how we are feeling in the environments that we're working in. And I think really one of the first things I'm really taking from Diane's really sort of inspiring presentation is that we must be bold. We mustn't be allowed to accept the shape of the role that has been defined for us for so many years. We are allowed to be capable. We are allowed to be successful, and we should be bold to do that. And until that is done, economics will not represent society. So I think that's really important. And then coming back in the last sections, we've been hearing about the pipeline, which is really important and really encouraging to hear the really positive work the bank's doing, which really does set the standard for others in sort of industry and in academia. And so often, I'm going to finish with, I'm afraid, a little bit outside of sort of the professional environment that we are in, because often when we hear women talking about how difficult it is to have children and a career, we immediately look to, if you like, our institutions and also our employers to try to fix that. But one of the reasons for that challenge of having children and a career is often the split of responsibility, not in the workplace, but in the home. And I sort of, not in any way to say this is your fault, take it back home, but maybe there's just a suggestion to remind ourselves as a society, we are all important, we all have value, and that power base in the home is also really important. So society itself should not just challenge ourselves within the organisations to be equal and fair, but also within the homes, so women have the opportunity to contribute, being wonderful, happy mothers, as well as being really successful senior economists. So in terms of my role then, it's really just to, very importantly, thank colleagues for all the work that they've done today, coming to speak to us and share their thoughts. As Misa has already mentioned, we have several more events coming up, and I encourage you to stay signed up to the mailing list to be one of the first to hear about the work of UK WEN. We will be opening registration in April for the Expert Panel Series event on the 11th of June, kindly hosted by FCA, on the invisible hand versus the regulator's hand, how can regulation stimulate innovation, and be featuring women economists and policy leaders at the forefront of financial services regulation, which really sounds rather excellent. We can only continue to deliver our plans with UK WEN with the support from our partners. So if your organisation is interested in partnering with us to deliver events like today, please do consider being a UK WEN champion. I think there's a QR code on, I don't know if it's on this, on the screen, for a short feedback survey for today's event. So please do share your reflections on today, and I think